Two. Hey, Vineyard family, Kent here. Welcome to our second week of worshiping together in our collective online family rooms. I don't know about you, but I found myself pleasantly surprised by the connection I experienced last week during our first watch party. A surprising connection with you and with the Father as we worship together. It wasn't as good as being together face to face, but it did surprise me that it worked as well as it did. Well, on a personal note, as you may know, I've been gone for a while. The Russia team and I left for Russia on the 28th of February, and the team and I spent about 4 days helping to build out an indoor bathroom at the Borodino Vineyard in rural Siberia. And yes, they were actually still using an outhouse in Siberia in the winter. Well, after doing our work project there, we traveled to the city of Krasnoyarsk, where we served as the ministry team in several settings. First of all, for the annual Siberian Vineyard Pastors and Leaders Conference, and then again for the Krasnoyarsk Vineyard's worship service the next day, and then again a third time at the Siberian Vineyard Pastors Retreat the next day and a half. It was a great trip in every way. It was quite a bit exhausting, and the team, by the way, was absolutely amazing. And on behalf of the team, I would like to thank you, Vineyard Church family, for your prayers and for your generous support. Well, no sooner had I returned from Siberia than my wife, son, and I took off for a long-planned, wonderfully relaxing, warm weather spring break getaway. And so from here to here in just a matter of a few days was a bit of a shock to the system. But now I've returned home to find that the Vineyard staff completely canceled church while I was gone. And what's more is because of all the traveling I've been doing, they've banned me from even coming into the office. So I guess when the cat's away. In all seriousness, though, I want to thank the staff for the wisdom and the leadership they've demonstrated as we navigate these completely unprecedented waters that we find ourselves in. Well, upon my re-entry from seclusion into the new normal of everyday life, I was caught off guard when I experienced my first empty aisle at a grocery store. Now, what in the world? I didn't yet know that was a thing. And I found a newspaper columnist who captured my same sense of astonishment. He wrote these words: "What's with the hoarding of hand sanitizer, latex gloves, protective masks, and yup, even toilet paper?" What we're witnessing is the inability or unwillingness to practice self-sacrifice for the greater good. Fear and greed are far more dangerous than any virus. They destroy us in a different way. Now, to be certain, we're seeing across the globe a great outpouring of courage and service and sacrifice, and that's heartening to see. And along those lines, I want to give a shout out to our healthcare professionals right here at home and to our own Wholeness Advocate team and the tremendous job they're doing checking up on us. Our thanks and our prayers are with all of you who are on the front lines. But it's been interesting to observe in our human race and in these times the contrast between our instinctive reflex of self-preservation and the extrinsic response of self-sacrifice. And this morning I want to continue to press into, this bedrock foundation of scriptural truth to help anchor our thoughts and our hearts and our responses, our extrinsic choices in these present difficult circumstances. In 2 Timothy 3:1, the Apostle Paul wrote the following words to a young leader named Timothy. "You should know this, Timothy, that in the last days there will be very difficult times." Paul wrote these words from prison in Rome, where he expected to be executed for his faith in the very near future, and that, in fact, happened. But Paul seemed concerned, even from prison, that Timothy, whom he viewed like a son, that Timothy might lose faith as he watched the suffering and the persecution that Paul and others were going through. And so, with that in mind, Paul made it a point to remind Timothy that in these last days, that is, in the season of world history that we're currently in the season between the resurrection of Jesus and the return of Jesus, the season that precedes the closing chapters of the final curtains of world history, Paul seemed to feel that it was very important to remind Timothy and to remind us that life would be very difficult. Well, why was this such a big deal that God inspired the Apostle Paul to pen these words in the Bible? You just got to know, church, that in the last days there will be very difficult times. Well, for the same reason that it's still important for us to know this truth today. See, when the going gets tough in life, many people lose their grip on God. When bad things happen to good people, when good people like the Apostle Paul get what seems to be the short end of the stick, a lot of Christians begin to entertain doubts about the goodness of God, or doubts about the power of God, or even doubts about the existence of God, with the result that simply when life gets hard, many people shake their fists at God and walk away. Now, I think this happens to a large degree because somewhere along the line, we bought into the idea that life would be a cakewalk for us if we followed Jesus. But that's simply not the case. Nowhere in His Word does the Father ever promise us that the life of following Jesus would be a tiptoe through the tulips. You gotta know this, church. In the last days, there will be, say, will be, very difficult times. In fact, in contrast to this mistaken perception that Christian life is supposed to be trouble-free, Jesus promised that life would be tough, even for His followers, even for you and me. Jesus promised us this in John 16:32. This is a passage that you've perhaps heard me teach on before. Here's what Jesus said. I've told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have, again, say will have, you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, because I have overcome the world. And so Jesus puts His cards on the table right here for us. Life will be painful, and anyone who says differently is selling something. Well, actually, that's the Dread Pirate Roberts from The Princess Bride. Jesus said, here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows. Now listen to this. And the peace of following Jesus is found not in the absence of trials and sorrows, but in the presence of Jesus, even in, and especially in, the midst of trials and sorrows. And so the application for us, church, is this. Don't abandon your grip on Jesus when the going gets tough. He hasn't abandoned His grip on you. And just because life is unusually difficult and painful for some of you right now, He hasn't abandoned His grip on world history. Jesus said, I've told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I've overcome the world. And so how do we do that? How do we take heart? How do we keep our grip on Jesus and have peace in Him when we're facing trials and sorrows here on earth? Well, it's simply this. We trust Him. It's called faith. Faith is choosing to believe that God is still good even when bad things are happening. Faith is choosing to believe that God is still in control even when it seems like all is out of control. And faith is choosing to believe that the promises of God are still true even when it seems that God is slow or maybe even delinquent about keeping His promises. If we want to thrive in peace, even when all around is not at peace, then we need to extrinsically choose faith in Jesus, extrinsically choose to trust Jesus, even when, and especially when, the going gets tough. And so, what does this extrinsic trust in Jesus look like? Well, if we pick back up in the Apostle Paul's words to Timothy in 2 Timothy 3, we see a laundry list of attitudes and actions that are actually the opposite of trusting Jesus, attitudes and actions that will characterize our human race in the final scenes of world history. And this is what we read there. Don't be naive. There are difficult times ahead. as the end approaches, people are going to be self-absorbed and money-hungry, self-promoting, stuck up, profane, contemptuous of parents, crude, coarse, dog-eat-dog, unbending, slanderers, impulsively wild, savage, cynical, treacherous, ruthless, bloated windbags, addicted to lust and allergic to God. They'll make a show of religion, but behind the scenes, they're animals. Stay clear of these peoples. That's a Message translation. I like the way they translated this passage. But in these verses, we see that as the timer is winding down on world history and as life becomes more and more difficult, that people will instinctively and intrinsically become more and more self-absorbed, more and more self-preserving. But the call to follow Jesus is the call to follow a different path, and especially to go down a different path when times are tough. This is what Jesus has to say in John 15:13. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Church, the greatest love is found not in intrinsic self-preservation, but in extrinsic self-sacrificial service to others, in living our lives for a purpose, for something that is greater than oneself. And so you got to know this, church. In the last days, there will be difficult times. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, Jesus says. I've overcome this earth. I've overcome this world. And I've told you all this so that you may have peace in me. And so, church, when the going gets tough, as it is now, don't lose your grip on Jesus. He hasn't lost his grip on you. He hasn't lost his grip on world history. He's still in control. And when the going gets tough, love others. Give yourself in the service of others. So right now, before we play our closing song, I want us to pause to redeclare our trust, to reestablish our grip on Jesus. And so pray these declarations with me. Jesus, I believe that you are still good, even when things seem bad. Jesus, I believe that you are still in control, even when it seems that all is out of control. And Jesus, I believe that your promises are still true. And even when it seems that maybe you're a little bit slow in keeping them. Jesus, I entrust my life to you. Amen. I want you to let the words of this last song be a continuation of your prayer. And then after the song, please feel free to hang out here in our virtual lobby, so to speak, and interact with one another and pray for one another in the comment sections here. God bless. We'll talk to you soon.